Mic'd Up Podcast, hosted by Dr. Mike Miller and Coby Duran of Central Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Texas, is a series of conversations about issues that matter. For people who have real questions and doubts, it covers topics of faith, theology, and philosophy in ways that are easy to understand. Ultimately, Mic'd Up is a podcast with a couple of guys having conversations about conversations you are having. Mic'd Up is produced by Al Lambert Jr. at Mic'd Up Studios in Jacksonville, Texas.
So Coby,
What's up?
Okay, can you never do that again? Just quick, just
Now.
maybe don't.
What's
do
up? It's back.
Okay. What's up?
There it is. I knew it was coming.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share this story. Most strange compliment I've ever received. I think I told you about this the other day. Didn't I tell you about this the other day?
no.
I walked into, I've been here for 12 years.
Yes.
I walked in.
Oh, yeah, you did.
I walked into one of our senior adult ladies' Sunday school classes like a few weeks ago, and I was preaching, so like I had my jacket on and stuff, and I walk in, and one of the ladies says, "Come, I just want to tell you, I just been meaning to tell you, you've really turned into a handsome young man," and I there's like a part of me that's like, huh.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. And then there's another part of me like, okay, so like for the last 12 years, like they're like, well, there's the ugly duck. Here we go. Got to look at this guy for a little bit while I make some announcement. Have you ever had a compliment where you're just like, I don't know how to receive that one?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite compliments I ever got here was when a guy came up to me after church one Sunday and said, I know a lot of people don't like your preaching, but I do. Thank you.
Because like everybody on the planet Earth has received a compliment at some point in time where like you look back at the person, you're just like, man, I have no idea to say
But I like
thank
this.
you.
People come up after I preach on Sunday and go, I got to tell you, that sermon was actually pretty good.
I'm shocked right now.
Wow, we're all shocked.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, are you ready to go? I got a topic for us today.
Do you now?
I've got one that I think this is going to be one of those topics that we're going to have to fight to not be frustrated as we speak on it.
Interesting.
All right.
Are we going to agree on this one?
Well, it's an open-ended question. So like I don't think there's like an agreement-disagreement thing. But I know you and I have kind of had conversations in this vein. Right. And I think that we're going to have to fight to like keep some of our frustration down because of some of the comments we have received. Okay. As individuals, not like necessarily ministry. But before we do that, welcome to the Mic'd Up Podcast, where we have the conversations.
About the conversations that you are having.
And this conversation is a conversation that is being had.
Okay, good.
All right, so in American Christianity right now, you have two, what I'm going to describe as phenomenon. Now, the one of them is significant. Phenomenon.
Sorry.
What was that? What is that? Did you just make that up on the spot?
That's Sesame Street.
Oh, Sesame
Phenomenon.
I wasn't smart enough to watch Sesame Street. They lost me at A. Like they started talking about the letters. I was like, I don't want to.
Oh, you didn't even make it to the count.
I didn't even make it to the count. Yeah. All right. So one of the phenomenon in American Christianity is this, and this is actually global Christianity, is this massive shift and growth in Pentecostalism.
Yeah.
It is the fastest growing denomination on the planet right now. Mm-hmm. We are seeing, so like Pentecostals, like depending on kind of where you're at.
But it's not the fastest growing in America, is it?
Oh yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Globally, yeah.
I knew globally it was.
Yeah, it's still, even in the United States, but like in the United States, it's a little bit different because it's like different branches of Pentecostalism. It's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so let me rewind it. In America, the charismatic movement,
which is so can be Pentecostal would be a part of the charismatic movement, but there are charismatics that are not Pentecostal.
That's right. Yeah, so that's a good clarification. I'm glad you mentioned that. And you do see in this particular movement, you see Baptist, you see Methodist, you see some of your Bible church people that are kind of drifting towards that movement.
Yeah.
But one of the movements that has caught the attention of a lot of influencers online is the movement of young American men shifting towards either A, Catholicism, or B, Eastern Orthodoxy. And
You're right.
About the frustration. Okay, so let me just go ahead.
Let me tell you
go ahead.
that both of these phenomenon have the same roots.
They do have the same roots. And we're going to, so I've got a question that is going to maybe take this in a way that I don't see many influencers talking about it online. So you see these influencers on both sides. You see the evangelical influencer that is kind of throwing let's specifically talk about like Eastern Orthodoxy for instance. You see the evangelical influencer who's specifically like, hey, this is why you shouldn't be Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah.
You see the Eastern Orthodox influencer saying, hey, this is why you should be Eastern Orthodox and not Protestant. And so they're both kind of like throwing shots at each other. And so to avoid frustration today, I want us to approach it from like a different perspective. And the perspective that I would like to see us approach it from is, okay, we do see, like, we have to acknowledge that there are evangelical young men leaving evangelical churches to move towards Eastern Orthodoxy. It's not a huge movement, but it is a growing movement. And like you have to put so much of this in context. So
like you're not seeing middle-aged and elderly people make that move.
No, you're not seeing a lot of women making that move. And so when we say that it's a phenomenon, what we have to acknowledge is that the Eastern Orthodox Church in America for a long time has either been in decline or just absolutely stagnant. And so any tip in the scale is significant for them. So it's not like this is like
even if
like
the decline is slowing.
Right, yeah. Like we're seeing way more evangelicals move towards the charismatic movement than we're seeing to the Eastern Orthodox movement. So, but it still is a phenomenon that is being addressed a lot online. Some of the shots that are being thrown by the Eastern Orthodox Church is like, well, hey, we are the one true church. We have a beautiful theology, a rich theology. It's a more manly church. And so you see these kind of young men that are kind of drifting that way. You also see evangelicals throwing shots too. And so, like I said, like that, you see a lot of mudslinging back and forth.
Yeah.
And by the way, like I think that some of the mudslinging is justified. So I'm not trying to like criticize that.
Yeah.
What I would like to see us do is say, okay, what is it that we as evangelicals can learn from this movement that is going on right now? It's not a huge movement, but it is a small movement in America.
Yeah.
What is it
I think
that we
this
can?
is a great conversation to have.
Okay, so cool. So like that's the question. Let's see where the conversation leads. So you have any initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, for one thing, I will say, there's some common roots, and I don't think this explains everything because there's also some differences between the movement to the charismatic. And by the way, the charismatic and the Anglican are about as opposite as you can be.
Yeah.
But they are both of them are heavy on experience. Now, it's a different kind of experience. And so I think where you get the commonality is they're looking for some sort of experience that they might not be getting in their normal evangelical church.
Yes.
So with the charismatics, you have the emotional, you have, this heavy reliance on the sign gifts and the ecstatic utterances and stuff like that, and the prophecy. And
Explain ecstatic utterances real quick.
well, ecstatic can either be speaking in tongues or just these like spontaneous words of knowledge or words from the Lord that come out from people. And so there's an experience that people are looking for that maybe they're not getting. If they go to a Baptist church, maybe they're not getting this thing that they feel. And there's also an experiential aspect to an Anglican church or
like
an
an
Orthodox church. It's a different kind of experience, but you've got the ritual, you've got, frankly, a sense of sacredness that you don't have in the free church tradition.
Yeah.
There's a reverence and an awe.
Can you explain, like, one of the words that I have seen, like, on YouTube, for example, is, like, people are kind of hashing this out, is, like, liturgical.
Yeah.
You and I, we know what that means. I don't know if the average person is going to understand, like, what a liturgical worship service looks like. Can you explain it?
Well, it's funny. So when we use that in a technical sense, what we're talking about is, like, if you go to a mainline Protestant church, which would, or if you go to a Catholic or an Orthodox church, there is a set structure to it. We call it a liturgy, and so there's a pattern that they follow. And like if you go to an Orthodox church, or let me just speak of where I have experience, the Methodist church. They put out, like, I knew if I went to this Methodist church or that Methodist church on a given Sunday, they were going to be reading the same passages of Scripture.
Right. Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean the sermon's going to be the same necessarily, but the responsive readings and things like that are all going to be the same. So there's this very, I'm going to say rigid, but not in a negative sense, but there's this very rigid structure that they're going to follow. The funny thing is, in the free church, so that's what we call it a free church tradition, is we don't have to follow that, but every church has its own liturgy.
Right.
If you come to Central on Sunday,
exactly. Yeah.
you know generally the pattern we're going to have, but it doesn't go beyond Central.
Yeah.
And so the liturgical churches are following a church liturgy. They also, the church calendar is going to be observed in those. You're going to have readings for Pentecost Sunday. You're going to have readings for, I don't know what all, but since I'm not
like
in
Lenten readings.
Lenten readings and all these kinds of things that you're not going to see typically in an evangelical church. And even like, we've done these Maundy Thursday services recently. Well, that's foreign to Baptists.
Yeah, it was foreign to us.
Yeah.
Right? Like when we first started.
And we just did a Good Friday service. It was my first Good Friday service.
Yeah.
It was your first Good Friday service, right? So we did that. And so, but if you're in one of these high church liturgical churches, and I say high church would be very formal. And all liturgical churches are not formal, but some of them are the more high church where the preacher's going to wear a robe and that kind of thing. But you're going to get those things. So, but that is an experience. I remember as a new Christian, family member connected by marriage that we had been inviting to church, told us one day, she said, "Oh, this morning I went to this Anglican church."
Yeah.
And I said, "How was it?" She said, "Beautiful. The service was so beautiful." And I'm not knocking that, but there is a sense of beauty and splendor and reverence that you get in that.
Let me push pause real fast and just the reason that, like you have said, like Anglican a couple of times, Anglicans are Protestants, but they're going to be some of the most liturgical high church Protestants.
That's Church of England, which is, in a lot of ways, they're very similar to Catholic, but they're not Catholic.
Right. And so like when you talk about, because I know that like the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, and the Anglican Church, they probably wouldn't like us grouping them together necessarily, but we're doing that because there are similarities.
Not to do with their theology or their identity, but just in the similarities of worship.
Right, yeah.
And so the worship experience is going to be an experience that, if you're looking for experience, you may or may not have some sort of emotional experience when you come to our church on Sunday, right? But it's also, I think I generally have an emotional experience at our church on Sunday, but it's just something different. And so, but there's also something with the Orthodox Church that I think particularly like Gen Z and even Gen Alpha. I mean, Gen Alpha's still pretty young, but Gen Alpha's starting to come into those like early or late teen years and stuff, right? It's hard for me to keep all of them straight.
Yeah.
But like that Gen Y, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, that I think they're looking for some things that they have not gotten in life and in church that the church can give.
Yeah.
For one thing, if you're going to an Orthodox church, they're going to be really strong on how they are connected throughout history.
Yeah.
Now, in my opinion, and not just my opinion, I think I can back this up with facts, they distort that history. Like they believe that they come right from the apostles. And I don't. And like the Roman Catholic Church, of course, they have an unbroken line of succession from Peter, they claim, which I disagree. But there is a connection there that they're getting with something outside of themselves that, frankly, the evangelical church doesn't give that we ought to. For example, when you come together at church and you read the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed together, you're reading things that people have been reading for like 15, 16, 1700 years.
Right.
This year is the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea.
Yeah.
And there is just something tethering in a world that's gone mad, in a world that frankly is debating what a woman is and what a man is.
Right.
This is giving them an anchor to times when that wasn't an issue.
Things were more simple.
Well, they romanticize those times. But
That's
yes,
true,
but
yeah.
there's this.
There wasn't much simple about the Roman Empire, was there?
No. And the truth is, the worldview of today is built on sand. And they're trying to connect with something deeper.
What a good word. I like the description there because that ties us right back to Scripture in Matthew 8, right?
And Luke 6, it's my sermon for this Sunday.
No, sorry, not Matthew 8, Matthew 7.
Matthew 7, yeah,
and Luke 6.
For this
So, like, you know, that's the man who built his house on a rock versus the man who built his house on the sand. Yeah. And I think that there is like this innate desire in all of us, which is why I love the imagery that you just brought up. There's this innate desire of all of us to have certainty, to have this assurance, to have this stability. And it does, like in the times that we're living in, it's just like, well, heck, you know, one of the, you know, you brought up the Anglican Church right now. You know, the Anglican Church has a very rich history. Well, I mean, when I say... So maybe I might let a little bit of my frustration out. Yeah. I may let some of my frustration out here because, like, when people start talking about history and things like that, it's like, hey, the Baptist Church has a really rich history.
It does.
Has a very beautiful history. And you can kind of point to lots of different denominations and say the exact same thing. And so, like, you look at the Anglican Church, and I know that there are some people that are deeply distraught within the Anglican Church because of their really radical shifts towards embracing, you know, LGBT lifestyles as righteous lifestyles.
That's right.
And so, like, you look at these spaces, and you know, which, like, I hate to, like, cast shade at somebody else because we as Baptists have our own things that we have to work through. But, you know, you look at, and we're battling these things out that for some people, they're just like, either for the people like me who's like, well, where's the battle? Like, why are we even talking about this?
Yeah.
But then you have other people who are just like, I don't like the uncertainty.
Right.
And then, you know, the promise of some of these other churches, like the Orthodox Church, is like, well, hey, you come here, you don't have to worry about that.
Right.
You know, we've got this 2,000.
We're doing what we've been doing for 2,000 years.
Right. And that is a promise that I hear them make.
Yeah, it definitely is. And you know, legitimately, they have that in the way they do things, right? Now, we're probably not going to get into this today, but the theology of the Orthodox Church is incredibly problematic. I also believe that they have rewritten their history, and so that's problematic.
They've made their history to be more cohesive than it actually is.
They have, and they have these. They're claiming ties to the apostles that just aren't there.
Yeah,
the Roman Church does that. They're making claims to the apostles that just aren't there, or ties to the apostles. And so, but you know, like I've talked to some of these folks, and they're like, "Well, I'm not worried about the theology."
It's like the Orthodox Church,
or the Catholic Church.
The Catholic Church,
and these are people who have gone.
Cross the Tiber.
Across the Tiber. The Tiber is a river in Rome. And so we talk about crossing the Tiber, going over to Rome. That their doctrine is of secondary importance to them. And so they're looking for the anchor. They're looking for this different kind of experience. I think this is one reason why these Gen Y, Z, and Alpha are longing for the old hymns again.
You know, so that is one of those weird, because there's going to be somebody who listens to this that's like, no, that's not true. These generations, and here's the deal. I am a millennial.
Yeah.
I talk to millennials, and yeah, there is a movement. It's not all of us. It's not all of us. But
I'm talking about the people younger than the millennials.
Even younger than us, yeah. But there is this movement. There is this movement among us where we're just like, yeah, we kind of like to connect with some of the older hymns. Now, I will say the caveat to that is that rarely when we say that do we mean played with an organ or a piano. We like our guitar riffs.
What they like are the old,
the lyrics.
The old words.
Yeah.
Here I raise mine Ebenezer. And I think what that's doing is that's giving them an anchor.
Yeah.
to something more solid. It's not a new fad.
Yeah.
It's something more solid. And,
Right.
And they're finding meaning in that.
Yeah. Because, there's obviously, again, like there's going to be those people that listen to that and they'll be like, well, y'all just said that like Pentecostal movement, charismatic movement is the fastest growing in the world and they don't tend to cling to these. And you're right, like they don't. But we do have to acknowledge that there's a significant portion of millennials and then generations below us that they do, like there is.
Okay, but let's talk about another similarity with the charismatic movement and the Orthodox or the Roman Church.
Okay.
And that is a discipline and an authority structure.
Yes, that's good.
And I think a lot of men, well, you look at the data, how many boys are being raised today without dads in the home?
Oh, man, it is insane.
It's staggering.
It's crazy.
And so what they're getting in the Orthodox churches, they're getting a priest, they're getting rules, they're getting structure, they're getting discipline, and they're craving it.
Yeah.
They're wanting this strong, and that's why they see it as more masculine. Now in the charismatic church, it's a little different, but in the charismatic church, it's like in the Baptist church, the pastor doesn't wield all the authority in the Baptist church.
Right, yeah.
In charismatic circles, that's a little different.
They sure do.
Like, for one thing, he can be speaking, he can be offering prophecy, and a lot of these guys do in the charismatic, and especially in the Pentecostal movement. God just told me this.
Yeah.
I'm speaking with authority. You don't cross me, and you don't, touch not the Lord's anointed.
Right.
Like you don't cross the preacher.
Yeah.
And I think what they're finding is what they didn't get from their dads and they didn't get in that structure, in that discipline, because they're out there trying to make it in a world now, and they're just floundering.
Do you think that it is innate to the human experience to desire authority?
Absolutely. God built us that way. We're created in the image and likeness of God. And what that means is we are created under His lordship. And this is a part of who we are, that there is this, Adam and Eve were put in the garden and given a rule to follow.
Yes.
And they broke the rule.
They broke the rule,
and it
yeah.
was
They had the
disastrous.
boundaries.
They did. And part of the consequences of the fall is we're longing for this. We're longing for Eden. We want to go back to the garden, and if we just go back, we'll obey the rules, right?
Right.
We want to go back where God walks with us every day.
Yeah.
And
No, that's so good because like we consider Eden. I think that when we are distorted, we can consider Eden as this just place of pure freedom. It's like, well, yes, it is a place of pure freedom because it's within the proper boundaries. Like there is no such thing as like unfiltered libertarian freedom in like everything that we do.
No.
Like everything is going to have some level of rule, law,
That's right.
boundaries, and things like that. And so because of it, we have to be able to submit. And if we don't, then we're going to be disordered in some areas of our life.
And I think, honestly, this is why you see a lot of young men who were, and I think less now, but gravitating toward this very strict, reformed, male-dominated,
You're right, because that is very similar.
rigid, Calvinistic, elder-led
Elder-led,
churches. I'm not knocking elder-led
Right,
churches,
yeah.
but what they found there, too, was, okay, I don't just go to church and everybody gets to make the rules. These guys are in charge,
Yeah.
and I'm going to submit to their authority. And I just think there's part of that. We want the father figures in our lives. We want those men in our lives who will go, hey, stop it. You're being an idiot. I'm going to turn 60 this year. I miss my dad. And one of the reasons I miss my dad is I can call him and go, hey, Dad, blah, blah, blah. And he'd go, no, son, you're being stupid. Well, that's why I called him, so he could tell me if that's the case. And I think we all want that. And that's why men need other men in their lives who do that. But I think these young guys, in a lot of ways, are looking for that, and they're finding it in these more hierarchical
Right.
and these more structured environments.
So, like, as we're talking about things that we can learn, like, let's just like talk about that authority just for a second, because this is huge for me. Like, I'm in like a interesting position because I'm not the head pastor of our church, so like I'm under your authority both as a church member and as a staff member, right? So, like, for me, it's going to look a little bit different because what we oftentimes see in I'll say Baptist because I mean that's my experience, right? Like I don't want to speak about what's not in my experience, and when I don't know for sure based on statistics. So what we see oftentimes in like Baptist churches, like when somebody gets called to accountability by the authority over them, like well, next thing you know, like we might see them head to the Baptist church down the road.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't have that option.
Right.
Like if I do that, like I'm losing your
livelihood,
my livelihood and things like that. So how is it that like we as Baptists, for example, can bring some of that, like bring some of that submission to authority back into like how we do?
Well, I think this Central's pretty good at this because we've practiced church discipline here.
Yeah.
And we know that we practice church discipline all the time, and people go, well, why? We haven't excommunicated people. No, the goal of church discipline is restoration, repentance, reconciliation, and that's how it ends most of the time.
Yeah, there's two stages before the bringing in front of the church.
Well, yeah, and honestly, I go like 12 stages. I mean, I really want to be slow and deliberate because my opinion is excommunication is a serious act that should be taken with a great deal of gravity, and you should be very careful before you wield that sword, cutting somebody out of the body.
Right.
But we have done that. But what we have done is it has been led by us who are in leadership, but we have brought the church on board with it so that we've only had unanimous votes when we've done that. And
when you said that we bring the church on board with it, it has been by no means coercion.
Absolutely.
And you see some people like criticize, like, oh, it's just like, these guys are just like, there's no accountability. Then I'm like, well, actually, I understand that all Baptist churches are autonomous, but I will say this. I think that there is more accountability for pastors in churches like ours than in other churches because it's like, hey, you got, like, you yourself, you have 5 men that are over you checking in, right? I mean, like, the personnel committee.
That's right.
And it is a deacon.
They do serve as deacons, and the deacons don't have any authority, but they select 5 guys that serve in a position of accountability over me and the rest of the staff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we do, and each church is going to be different, but I think the way a church like ours does that is, and Central is really good. Central recognizes my authority as pastor.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's really important that I don't abuse that, but I've talked before, I think how, our deacons don't have any authority. They don't make any decisions, but I bounce things off of them. Mm-hmm. And frequently I'll go to them and I'll say, hey guys, what do you think about this? And they'll even go, Mike, we don't think that's a good idea, but if you're going to do it, we'll follow you.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, but I don't want you to do something that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
But there's that sense that, Mike, we're going to submit to your authority if you insist we do this. But we're giving you our opinion on it.
Let me ask you this, because I've never been a part of these meetings with you and the personnel. I have been in a personnel committee meeting, but I haven't been a part of like yours personnel. Like, do those guys ever like push back on you and like tell you like, hey, we're like, you need some correction here or whatever? Like, is there like accountability in those meetings?
Yeah, there is, and I wouldn't say they've ever come to me and like. I don't think there's been anything they needed to rebuke me on, but there have been times they've come to me and said, hey, we see that this is an area that maybe you're not giving attention to. Yeah. And we'd like to see you get. But they're like, what do you think about that? Are we wrong? Are we missing it?
Yeah.
And like, I remember one time that they said to me, and they do this annually with me, as they sit down and say, like they said, here's an area we really think you're missing to minister to people. And I was like, man, you're right. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, let's figure out how can you do that? And so they weren't just like, hey, here's where you're.
Right. Yeah.
They're like, how can we help you come up with a solution for that? And so.
And I didn't mean to, I realized that question. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot because, like, obviously they're not calling you account for something immoral or something like that.
No.
I was more talking about what you.
No, but
you
they
address.
would.
Right, they would.
Yeah.
And I guess like that's the cool thing about and I think that churches in general, just like evangelical churches in general, if your head pastor is his own authority.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that that's dangerous.
Yeah.
And I do think that like we can learn from, some of those other traditions that have like structures of authority over that. And like and the beautiful thing is here at Central, like we have that.
Yeah, we do.
And so like when we're saying, hey, like Mike has some pastoral authority in your life, we're not saying that he has the ultimate authority in your life, because you have people in authority over you. Like there's just to be this level of like trust and submission, because we have to have authority in our life.
We do. I mean, if nobody's holding you accountable to what you're doing, I think it's a dangerous position.
I have this is going to sound. This was like a very heavy conviction that I got from God. So I don't want this to sound like I'm bragging, because like it still is ridiculously hard for me. But like one of my mentors that like I check in, like that I confess into, that I check in with every week, like part of that relationship started with me telling him like, hey, I'm giving you authority in my life. Yeah. And if at any point in time I tell you something that you're just like, ooh, what's going on there? I'm like, I'm going to submit to it. Yeah. So, I prayed very heavily about who that person was going to be. I prayed very heavily. And he's one person, like you're a person that has authority in my life. I have some friends here in Jacksonville that have authority, but that was like one of those deals. And I remember like entering into that mentor-mentee relationship with this particular guy and having that. I was like, okay, like it is scary. Like, let me just be very clear. Like, it is scary that I have given somebody that level of authority in my life. But it's also very it's also very comforting too, because I can trust him. I know he's got my best interest in mind, and I'm sitting here like, okay. So
let's sort of steer it back.
Yeah, good.
We all need that, and I think these young men who didn't have that growing up, I think that's one thing they're looking for. And I think what we can do is do a better job of providing that in our evangelical tradition. I think another thing we can do is I think we've been really, really in fact, I know Baptist pastors who don't know Baptist history. So like one of the things we do in our new member classes is I've got a whole section where I do Baptist history and tell them who Baptists are, where we came from, what distinguishes us as Baptists. Yeah. And, because
most people don't know.
Most people don't. And I try to work that into sermons where I can. And I talk about, our long history of persecution and therefore our battle for religious liberty. And I even had I've had people come up to me and go, well, I didn't know that about Baptists. I thought we were, like people go, well, I thought we came from Anabaptists. Well, no, we actually didn't come from Anabaptists. Right. We came from English separatists. They did. They gave us refuge. But we came from the English separatists, and people just don't know this. And we've got this beautiful history, where when the Church of England was persecuting, people who were translating Scripture into English and doing these kinds of things, or coming up with their own translations, and you had the Puritans who were trying to purify the church, and then you had these group of guys that just said, "This is taking too long," and they broke off and started their own thing, and they got severely persecuted, and they had to flee England. Then when they come to the New World, what year was it that in the colony of Massachusetts they made it illegal to be a Baptist? And
well, I mean, yeah.
So this is a history that we have,
and it is like when I hear people talk about like, hey, reasons you should become an Orthodox or something like that. Yeah. We have this beautiful, rich history, and it's like, hey, look, your history might be longer than ours. We got a beautiful and rich history too, though. Yeah. And it is a history that is riddled with immense persecution.
Yeah. Here's also what I would say to them. Your structure and identity as an Orthodox church has a longer history than our identity as Baptists. But we also trace our theology and our beginnings back to the apostles.
Yeah, and that's something right there that like a lot of people have hit on that I think is really good, because we have the teachings of the apostles in the Scriptures. Right. Like we see what they said.
Yes.
So let me ask you, because you've given us, okay, so like just for clarity's sake, I think that you hit well on like the having this rock versus sand foundation. Mm-hmm. So, to me, as I hear that, what I'm hearing from you is, okay, as a Baptist, as an evangelical, as a Protestant, if we feed into this culture that is saying, embrace this sin, embrace this politician, embrace this person, then we're gonna have a house built on sand.
Yep, that's right.
And we should expect to lose people.
That's right.
But if we say no, like if we stick with our roots here.
Well, and especially what you've had happen, let's just be honest, in the evangelical church, is the evangelical church trying to find its identity in political arm.
Oh, yeah.
To be, for example, a white evangelical is to be Republican.
Right.
And that is not our identity.
That's exactly right.
And not only that, I don't care if you're the most hardcore Republican out there. The Republican, you wouldn't say that all Republican candidates or office holders are paradigms of moral virtue, right?
Yeah.
And so what are we hitching ourselves? Are we going to hitch ourselves to the apostles and their teaching? Or are we going to hitch ourselves to whoever the latest candidate is in our particular party? Right. And then we're going to shift as his views shift from the previous guy's views. Well, now this is what we're about. It used to be this what we're about. And so what we're doing as evangelicals is we're also building on sand.
Man, that like as you're like describing, I'm imagining. Because you're exactly. I hadn't even thought about that. You just put such a vivid picture there for us. Like, the last since about 2016, it has been a sandy platform.
Well, I would even go further back than that.
Maybe even further back than that. That's when I guess I started maybe paying more attention. I guess.
Yeah.
Man,
I'm older than you.
That's true. That is true. Wiser too.
Yeah, I am.
That's a compliment. Take it. Okay, so we talked a lot about the authority. We talked about the Baptist history. And I think that's just practical, right? Like learn it, like teach it.
Yeah.
Tell people what we have in our history and how we trace some of their things back. Because as people talk about baptism, like we got to understand that like baptism was something that yes, the early church fathers taught very specifically about baptism in their soteriology, but it was not a cohesive voice throughout the church history.
Absolutely not.
That happened much later before there's finally like some definitive statements.
Well, and I know we're not talking about the Roman Catholic Church, but you look at how Roman Catholic theology has changed and developed over the centuries.
Oh, yeah.
And they talk about this long line, of continuity, and it has been anything but.
Right. Yeah, and you've had church councils that have overturned other church councils.
Yeah.
There's things like that I'm again, I got to be careful that I don't like use my frustration to launch this stuff because we're trying to learn here, but it's not as cohesive as it seems.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, it's rich, sure, but it's not as cohesive as it seems. And then as you look at like our Baptist history, it's like, we had moments that I'm not proud of. I'm not proud of how the Southern Baptist Convention got started. But you know what? Like there still is like a lot of beauty and a lot of rich history that we can look at there and say, man, this is good.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's where I guess the last thing that
Good. We're running long.
we are running long. How do you're a pastor. What do you say to folks who are like, all right, they have this liturgical style of worship? Because by the way, obviously not everybody likes a liturgical style of worship.
Obviously.
So what do you say to the evangelical churches as far as like, hey, what might be something we could learn from, say, a Anglican, Catholic, Orthodox?
Well, I would say you don't have to become liturgical, but could you start incorporating a corporate reading of the Nicene Creed? That's something I'd actually like to see us do.
Yeah.
We did the Good Friday service, and what did we do on the Good Friday service?
There's just a bunch of
We had scripture reading and responsive reading.
Yeah.
And a couple of songs.
And by the way, I think you told me the other day, so I went into that just like, man, this thing is either about to be a bomb or
So did I.
it'll be really good.
People are going to just walk out disgusted or they're going to love it. And they loved it.
And they did. I haven't heard any negative feedback yet.
Nope.
I think you said that you might have heard one.
One person just said, responsive readings are weird to me.
Yeah.
They make me feel weird.
Yeah.
But he wasn't complaining.
Right.
He was answering a question. What'd you think?
I mean, I had like one of our Sunday school teachers just, I think it was either last week or the week before last, like, hey, can you send me all those responsive readings so that way he wanted to use them in his Sunday school class somehow. But, like, we're not doing that every Sunday.
Right.
But incorporating that at times can be beneficial.
Why can't we do that? Why can't we bring in some hymns? Why can't we teach our history, whether it's in preaching? You remember what we did in 1517? It was 2017, the 500th year of the Protestant Reformation.
Right.
We took the month of October and we had a Reformation minute every Sunday. We did a handout and it was things like that. Why can't we, teach on stuff like that? And I'm hoping to do some stuff this summer on the Nicene Creed as we're at the 1700th anniversary of that. But also, what can we do to start teaching our history better? Like I did on Sunday nights one time, I just did church history. And, a handful of people show up for that, right?
Yeah.
So, how do you do it in a way that people are actually going to
Like engage with it.
engage with it?
Yeah, because there's going to be some people who are just like, hey, I'm I'm committed here. This is my church. This is my family.
Yeah.
But then you are going to have those people who need that.
Yeah.
So offer it. You
Yeah.
know, like,
Well, and I think too, though, if we can help people gain an appreciation for our history, that's going to make them even more committed to the church. Maybe it's a naive perspective, but that's what I think. But like in my master class, I'm doing this seminary at church, so I'm in New Testament survey right now. I did Old Testament survey, but we're going to have a section on church history, so I'm going to teach through church history on Wednesday nights.
I remember vividly, like, being a Baptist, but not being a committed Baptist.
Yeah.
Let me say that, until I took my first Baptist history class, and I was just like, I'm sold.
Yeah, right.
And it wasn't even like the theology necessarily that drew me in. It was just like,
Well, we're not
this
even the
is
only ones
cool.
that have Baptist theology.
Right, yeah, and so it wasn't like this distinctive theology that drew me in. It was just like, this history is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, this is great.
I know pastors out there that are Baptist pastors that, oh, no, I'm not for religious liberty. We need to be a Christian nation. And I'm like, then
You're not a Baptist.
Don't call yourself a Baptist.
That's right.
Yeah, you're free to have that opinion. It's just not a Baptist
You ain't no
opinion.
Baptist then, if that's.
I mean, that's like saying, well, yeah, I'm a Baptist, but we baptize infants so they'll be saved.
Yep, you're not a Baptist.
No.
That's one of our key distinctives, right there.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I think you've given us some excellent things, and I'm looking. I've topped them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Areas, 4 or 5 areas here. So, and like I said, maybe there's a time where we revisit this in the future if it continues to grow, if the online discourse continues to grow, where maybe we speak more directly to some of those theological differences. But I do think that, like, I just have the conviction that anytime we see a movement happen, it's like, okay, like, what's the first thing we can learn from this? And so I haven't seen a lot of guys commenting on that online. I see a lot of mudslinging, but I haven't seen a lot of like, hey, yeah, we can learn. This is healthy. And so wanted to have that conversation. You got anything to close?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm ready.
I think it's been a good one.
It has been a good one. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yes. And Oxbow Bakery.
HTO.
You have the opportunity to sponsor
Ground floor opportunity here.
the Mic'd Up Podcast. All right, folks, y'all have a good one. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.